Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Michael Muty, a partner at Baker & Hostetler, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Jarrett Adams. In addition to my day job, I serve as the president of the Northeast Ohio chapter of the American Constitution Society. ACS is a nationwide network of progressive lawyers, judges, students, and professors, all dedicated to the promise of our Constitution and to the values that it embodies: civil rights and liberties, genuine democracy, and access to justice. Over the past few years, our chapter has hosted various programs on barriers to justice generally and the problem of wrongful convictions specifically. For example, we heard from Ohio Attorney General Jim Petro and his wife Nancy about the myths of our criminal justice system and how they produce wrongful convictions. And to be clear, Jim and Nancy are both Republicans, which shows that this issue is not a partisan one. Last year, we heard from Ricky Jackson, a Clevelander who spent 39 years of his life behind bars, several of which on death row, for a crime that he did not commit. And at last year's ACS convention in Washington, D.C., I was fortunate enough to meet Jarrett Adams, who has an experience in common with Ricky Jackson. Mr. Adams was 17 years old when he was sentenced to 28 years in a maximum security prison after being convicted of sexual assault. After serving nearly 10 years and filing multiple appeals, he was exonerated with the help of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. Rather than be overcome by bitterness, Mr. Adams used the injustice that he had endured as an inspiration to become an advocate for the underserved. He enrolled in the Loyola University Chicago School of Law after graduating from Roosevelt University with high honors. In May 2015, Mr. Adams graduated from law school and started a public interest fellowship with Honorable Anne Claire Williams, a judge on the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, the same court that had reversed Jarrett's conviction because of his trial lawyer's constitutional deficiencies. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Adams, along with fellow Life After Innocence exoneree Antoine Day, established the Life After Justice Center, which serves as, quote, an advocate for the rights of the wrongfully convicted by seeking health care, housing, job training, computer skills, finance classes, mentoring, and more, end quote. This past year, Mr. Adams passed the New York State Bar, and just last month, he joined the York Innocence Project as one of its attorneys, serving our profession and our society by freeing wrongfully convicted men and women. Since 1989, innocence projects across the country have exonerated 342 wrongfully convicted inmates in 37 states, 70% of whom have been people of color. While his accomplishments can be considered extraordinary, part of Mr. Adams' story is not unique. According to a 2014 study published in the journal PNAS, more than 4% of those sentenced to death between 1973 and 2004 are likely innocent, and men of color are disproportionately represented in that figure. It begs various questions. How do we combat racism in the criminal justice system to ensure that suspects are treated as truly innocent until proven guilty? What role can attorneys play in creating a justice system that is truly fair for all? The conversation on race, equality, in America's criminal justice system is an ongoing one nationwide and here at the City Club. And we're so glad to add Mr. Adams' voice to the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, please join me in welcoming Jarrett Adams.
All right. Thank you all for joining us here today. Mike, thanks for that great introduction. As I'm starting to get more and more speaking opportunities, I've come to find that the introduction is like the best part. You get to hear you get to hear someone say these great things about you. But thank you so much. This is something that me and Mike worked on for over a year now. Trying to get me to come and to tell my story. So I'm very thankful. I'm thankful for Stephanie, the City Club, for having me here today. My story began when I was 17 years old. I thought it was a good idea to go with friends to a college party in Wisconsin, which is like an hour and a half outside of Chicago. And it changed the trajectory of my life forever. You know, 17 years old, just all in the name of fun. And at 17-year-olds, many of you may be, or getting close to, we do things as kids without thinking about the repercussions. Well, in my case, you know, me just going to a party ended with me being falsely accused of a sexual assault I didn't commit. At the age of 17, just like most 17-year-olds, look, making out, sex, drinking without your parents knowing, smoking pot, that comes with being a teenager. But with me, it also came with a false accusation, and that changed everything. The reality for me was totally different after this accusation. I was a kid thinking about, you know, even during trial, you know, about the chores that I needed to do when I got home during the weekend. But I ended up being sentenced to serve 28 years in prison. My mother, a single mother, worked 2 jobs, and it still wasn't enough to be able to afford an attorney. And that, in many instances, is the reason that our prison population is overfilling right now. And it's the access to justice. Yes, the prison system has a disproportionate amount of black and brown men. But if we were all green, it would have a disproportionate amount of poor green people in prison. Being an attorney is more than just saying I'm an attorney and wearing nice ties. We are promising and being sworn in to serve the people. And that's exactly what I set out to do once I was released. When I was sentenced in 1998 to prison, the first prison that I went to was Green Bay, Wisconsin. And it was one of the most violent prisons in the state of Wisconsin. And I fortunately was never attacked, but you can't erase what your eyes see. Prison isn't a place of corrections, it's a place of warehousing. I saw on a daily basis men just waking up, eating, going to sleep, and just waving the white flag on their lives. And 90% of those men will be going home one day. And I really sat and I thought about that at the same time while fighting for my freedom. That fight didn't start until one day while in the prison cell. I was celled up with a man who was close to 60 years old. He had been in prison for about 20 years. And he was an older guy, older white man who was found guilty of 2 murders. And he would tell you, look, I committed the crime, and so I'm here, and I know why I'm here. After an incident happened in the prison, we were all on lockdown. And when you're in prison, you're on lockdown, you're pretty much in your cell, and they do an investigation to find out if it's an isolated incident or if there's just like a full-scale riot. Well, while on lockdown was the first time, strangely, that I really had a conversation with someone I had been in a cell with for almost 6 months. And during this time, I just so happened to have a prison phone call. And I was calling out to my parents. And they bring you the phone in your cell. Everything's in your cell. Your bathroom's in your cell. They feed you in your cell. So this phone call in my cell that day, in the year 2000 at the time, was very, very, very instrumental to me getting right here today. As I'm on the phone and I'm speaking to my mother and my aunts, I'm telling them about how they denied another one of my appeals. And they basically were denying my appeals throughout the state of Wisconsin by saying, well, your lawyer chose a strategy, that's a strategy you can't do over. They never addressed any of the witnesses that proved definitively it was impossible for me to be two places at one time. They never addressed that at all. And me, in prison, I got to the point where I was in a cycle, just like many of the people that I was in prison with. And I just didn't want to deal with my case. And as I'm talking to my mother on the phone and I'm telling them, look, they denied another one of my appeals. I don't understand why. As soon as I got off the phone, my cellmate told me to get down off of the top bunk. He was listening to everything that I said on the phone because he was right on the bottom bunk. And he said, listen, you know, I've been in this cell with you almost 6 months. I've never heard you say anything about your innocence, your case. I mean, you don't do anything but work out, play basketball, and play chess. Quite frankly, you act like you're in college. And it wasn't until I had that conversation with him that I saw myself in this same cycle of giving up and not thinking about anything else. And he said, let me see your transcripts. Let me see your files. And I gave them to him that day, many of which were unopened and still in the envelope from my attorney, because I just wasn't strong enough to deal with the reality of being in prison for 28 years with the mandatory release of 2019. I wasn't strong enough to take my own life, but I also wasn't strong enough to deal with the reality of the place that I was in. Over the course of a week, we had gotten off of lockdown, and he read through my transcripts and all of my police reports. And I, again, went out and played basketball, chess, and worked out. This was my therapeutic way of not dealing with it. And I came back to my cell one day, and he had all of my paperwork spread out, and he had the police reports in hand. And he said, sit down. And he threw me a notepad and a pen. And he said, look, I'm never getting out of this place. You're in here for some racist bull crap with no evidence. And you're going to play chess, you're working out, and you're giving up. It's like you're 18, 19 years old. You have the rest of your life ahead of you. You need to start working on fighting for your innocence. I've never seen a case so devoid of any evidence. That day, I put down my basketball shoes. I got rid of my chessboard, which I really loved. I actually made the chessboard myself. And I went to the law library and I started to craft my own shoddy version of a petition to get myself home. I started off writing letters to everyone, you know, NAACP, Innocence Projects, Oprah. I tried to find Stedman's address. I was writing everyone, trying to tell them I was innocent. But I realized that as the years went by, my writing got better. My research got better. So I went from saying, hey, look, I'm innocent, get me out, to, hey, look, I'm innocent. Strickland versus Washington is a case where a lawyer was defective and his constitutional rights were denied because this lawyer didn't do his job. And as immediately as I started writing these letters and sending them out, I got a response. I got a response from the Wisconsin Innocence Project. And Keith Finley is the director of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. And they came and saw me with 2 law students who were in school at the time. And they said, you know, do you mind if we take your case? And I almost fell over like, do I mind? Like, I didn't know you had to ask. And so I told them absolutely. They took my case and they started litigating my case in court. And they did this federally. And to not be too confusing, once you exhaust all of your remedies in state court and you appeal, there's a process. You have opportunity to file in a federal court and say, look, there are constitutional flaws in this conviction. Would you overturn it? And the 7th Circuit granted me a certificate to appeal. And the Wisconsin Innocence Project appealed my conviction all the way to the 7th Circuit, where 3 panel judges unanimously agreed to overturn my conviction. As I listened to them argue my conviction, I was on the phone in prison with shackles on, listening to them argue on my behalf in the 7th Circuit in Chicago. And almost a year to the date that they argued my conviction in that court, I was released, you know? And that was another fight that started. Because now I'm released. I don't have a record expunged. But how do you expunge 10 years that are missing from your life? While doing a report, CBS, they asked me to get pictures. And I went to my mother's house and, not only just to eat her food, but to get these pictures. And I looked through the photo album, and from when I was a baby up until 17 years old when I graduated high school, there are pictures. And those pictures do not start again until I was 27 years old. And that, as strong as I am, almost made me remove myself from the room and go cry. But it really put into perspective just how you can't erase that, And I got out, and I noticed when I got out that my aunts and my mother, their emotions were very high and very sensitive to me. They just didn't know, right? All of the misconceptions that you believe from prison and people who go to prison, you just don't know, because you know that they aren't set up. We aren't set up once we release from prison to do very well. So they thought the same about me as well. And I just felt so God awful that I put them through this. Like, I made the decision to go sneak and go to this party. And although I wasn't guilty, I felt so guilty that when my mother had to go to church and they would ask, where was her son? That dark cloud was over her head, and she would be brought to tears. So I can't tell you the day that I knew I would be an attorney in the state of New York, but I did know that I owed that woman. I owed her for the prison phone calls. I owed her for the support. I owed her for giving me birth twice. One time to get me here, and for continuing to keep my spirit alive as I sat for 10 years in a prison. I got up off of the couch in 2007, a month after I was released, and I walked 3 miles and enrolled in South Suburban Community College. Now, 3 miles isn't quite that long, but in Chicago in February, it is long. I'm telling you, okay? The wind was blowing. I had this little thin coat on. I enrolled in school, and I just wanted to be able to one day, someday, do what I'm doing now and be able to contribute, to be able to talk to people who are going through things, and even talk to people before they go through things, to help them understand that, this is real and this is possible. I graduated in 2009 from South Suburban. I was able to meet someone who introduced me to someone who hired me as a full-time investigator at the Federal Public Defender's Office. I got that job, and that job, it really contributed to my growth as a person. I went from being in prison just in 2007, and in 2010, I'm actually going in 2 prisons and taking statements, and I'm helping people, and I'm contributing. And that encouraged me to continue to go and continue to go to school. So I went to school at night, and my schedule was ridiculous. Now that I get the opportunity to sit back and think about it, I would get up at 5, get to work at about 6:30 before anyone got there and heard me copying 100 papers from a book. Go to work during the day, 9 to 5, and serving subpoenas and stuff like that in Chicago. I never really realized how many loose dogs were around in the city until I started serving subpoenas as an investigator. So I did that, and I would come back from work into the office and read from 5 to 6 and go to school at night from 6 to 9:30. And I would get home at about 11:30 and just repeat the process. And I did that for 5 years. That was undergrad at Roosevelt and the 3 years at college. And I'm saying that specifically for you kids that are here. Look, you're going to have obstacles always in life, but you're going to have to decide whether or not you go around it, go over it, or right through it. But you're going to have to keep going. And that is, look, that is a real message. And it's not scripted. And that's what I had to do. I didn't know I would be here today at all as an attorney, but I knew I wanted to do something, and I knew I was, if you read the book of Jarrett Adams, it wasn't going to say wrongfully convicted got out the end. That just wasn't going to be it. Not at all. And I was able to get through law school by continuing to network and meet great people. I met great attorneys. And graduating law school was an outstanding feeling, but what's even better was me clerking in the Seventh Circuit. Because I'm clerking in the Seventh Circuit, the same circuit that overturned my conviction. Many of the times, I would have to ask the clerk that was in the courtroom with me what all was going on in court, because I was daydreaming back to when I was in a maximum security prison, listening on the phone to attorneys argue my case for my freedom. And now I'm in the same courtroom less than 10 years later as a graduating law student on his way to becoming a lawyer. It just made me pinch myself. It really did. And Judge Ann Williams was my mentor. I met her as I started law school because I applied for the Chicago Bar Scholarship Foundation, which I won, and she was one of the deciding vote members. And that was very important for me because, again, nothing on my record, but the tentacles of a wrongful conviction will reach you almost forever. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have credit. And bankers didn't find me creditworthy when they did a credit check, and the last known address was a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. So while most people were getting their student loan money and buying Starbucks, I was bringing Folgers Crystal to school and paying my way through college because of the difficulties that I endured with money. And so that scholarship that I received from the Chicago Bar Foundation was very, very, very important to getting me where I am today. And I never lost touch of that relationship. I continued to send Judge Williams emails, updates, and let her know how I was doing in school. And that gave me the opportunity to clerk on the very same circuit that overturned my conviction. I spent the next 6 months after I clerked in the Seventh Circuit in the Southern District of New York. And I clerked for Judge Deborah Batts, and she was another amazing judge, another just an amazing person who sat me down and told me, things that definitely I needed to know as a young person starting a legal career. The bar has absolutely nothing to do with being a lawyer. Oh my goodness, it just doesn't, right? But it's necessary, right? And you have to do what you need to do to get through and get by, and that's exactly what I did. But I needed that community of support, and I got that continuously to get to where I am today. I passed the New York Bar, started working for the Innocence Project, and it's I could pinch myself sometimes as I walk through the door, and I have my case files of people who I'm fighting for their innocence. And, here it is, not even 10 years ago, I was fighting for my own innocence, And I just, I don't want to seem as if what I did was just so amazing and no one else can do it, because you absolutely can. You have to believe in yourself. The one person that should never stop believing in you is you. And so I know this is a talk about my life and my story, but whenever I'm in a room with kids who are close to my age, I make sure that I address you and I let you know that you have to continue to push forward. So I know that my time is short, and I have a timer up here to make sure that I stay within the time limit. I'll close by saying this. I had a bird's eye view of the criminal justice system. It is not a place of corrections. It is a place of warehouse. The two scariest things that I ever saw in prison were not violence. One of them was people getting out in the wintertime and coming right back in the summer. And because I was there for so long, I would see these same people come right back. And I would have conversations with them and, what happened, man? And basically, what I got from what they were telling me was they were first convicted from a crime in their community. They were in prison with no skills at all being taught to them. They were released, where? Right back into the community where the crime happened at. and they were right back as a result of that. And that's what's happening in our prison. The second thing that really just shook me, as I'm watching a couple guys play basketball, I'm noticing that they're calling each other names, and I'm thinking like it's just nicknames. People in prison have nicknames. They're referring to each other as pops, old man, grandpops, and son. I didn't learn until a month later that they weren't nicknames. That was a grandfather, a father, and a son in one prison, not on the same crime. Could you imagine how their family looks like right now? And if we continue to banish people from society and break down these structures in our community, how can we ever expect to stop the senseless gun violence that is plaguing our community? How do we ever expect to bridge the gap of the police in the community? Women are strong, but they're not strong enough to be a father and a mother. And there are a lot of fathers in prison. Some rightfully, but a lot just because they were in the back seat of a car that happened to send out a couple shots, and it's ridiculous. And an enormous amount of men, and increasingly women, are in prison for drugs, for pot. And now you're telling me you can sell pot and create pharmacies legally, but they're still in prison? That's a head scratcher. And it's taking its toll on our community. You can't put people in prison, teach them nothing, and then release them and tell them do good. It doesn't make any sense. And you don't have to be an attorney, a rocket scientist, or anything like that to understand that this system is broken, and it has been broken since its inception. Its design is flawed. Now people are speaking about it, but they're speaking about it now because, again, it's not so much a racial color line. It's access to justice. If you're poor and you can't put up a defense, your chances of going to prison are high. An attorney I won't name told me this as I was matriculating through law school. He said, look, I'd rather be rich as hell and guilty as hell than poor as hell and innocent as hell. And that is so truth. That's just truth in the reality of it. And the people that we release from prison are going right back where? Into our communities. And now they're starting to boil over into everyone's neighborhood. And everyone must take notice to this and do something about this. I don't care if you're in the library, or you're a librarian, you're a doctor, whatever it is, have these real conversations at the water fountain. Because what you do, what you decide, who you vote for, it does have an effect. Speak up, because we all will be here and be gone someday, but we're gonna leave it to the next generation. How do you wanna leave it, right? Do you wanna continue to be the greatest country in the world and also the greatest prisoner in the world? It can't be. We can't say to ourselves that there are 1-point-something million people that are worthy of banishing from society. I worked for some of the most prestigious judges, the smartest attorneys, and still some of the most thoughtful and eloquent and smartest people I've ever met were right there in prison with a prison number on their chest. Very smart men. And we don't know what we're banishing from society. And I'll reach you by reaching you this. How do we know that one of these young men or young women who are in prison forever won't have the groundbreaking idea for a medication that can cure cancer, for something that can contribute to society? And some people are banished and placed in these situations simply by the demographic where they're born at. And it shouldn't be that way. I thank you all for your time, and I really appreciate coming out today. Thank you all.
I'm Stephanie Jansky, Director of Programming at the City Club of Cleveland, and today we are enjoying a Friday forum with Jarrett Adams, attorney and co-founder of Life After Justice. We're about to begin the Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining us via our radio broadcast, webcast, or new live simulcast at the Parma Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. If you would like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will try and work it into the forum. We want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and actually questions. Holding our microphones today are Marketing and Outreach Fellow Faye Walker and Office Assistant Wesley Allen. May we have the first question, please?
Good afternoon. I am so happy that you're here, and I'm glad to see that the young people here to hear your important message. I'm a retired school teacher, and so often students would come in front of me who have the same story that you have, that are frustrated and have been falsely accused of something. And so my question is, what can a teacher say to a student who has stopped believing in himself or herself, no longer has his or her eyes on the prize, is just ready to give up? So what would you say to a teacher to try to help that student?
Well, first, thank you for your question. Teachers have one of the most difficult jobs in society, like for real. The attention span of kids, teenagers, are like, so I would encourage you to do this. You as the teacher have, in some ways, more of an effect on a student's life than their parents, because you're around them and you see them so much. And you can't give up. If they give up, that's one thing, but you can't give up encouraging them. You just can't. It's a full-time job, like it really is. And I'm sure that you take a lot of these stories home with you as a teacher, and it weighs heavily on your heart. But you have to continue to encourage them. Continue to encourage them and continue to, tell them stories. Like I'm not the only, young black man who's been able to overcome the odds. Although, I don't get as much airtime as if I was a rapper or something like that. There are stories that you can find to continue to encourage these kids to continue to push forward. And I really don't have, the concrete answer for you other than to say that, look, faith is believing until it becomes true. Come on now. So continue to beg that they have faith and continue to push forward. Thank you again for your question.
I wanted to know, after you got out of jail, did you go back up to the jail and speak with your cellmate?
Yeah, actually, I believe he passed away, and it was hard for me to find like him and where he went, because which will sound strange is when you're in prison, like you're not known by a name, like you just have numbers on an ID. So you don't really know people's full name and government names and stuff like that. So I was reaching around letters and trying to contact him and stuff like that. And I believe one of my letters did make it to him. He was a person who he didn't care about being known or anything like that. He just wanted to say his piece. And quite honestly, most of the time I was in there with him, he was like a grumpy old man. I'm like, for real. So I wasn't able to have as great a relationship with him as I wanted to. And specifically when I got out, there was just so much that I had to deal with getting out and starting a new life. It's just I can give you one example. I go down to go get my ID, and you all who've ever been to go get an ID, you know how those lines are, right? They're just ridiculous down. So I go down to get my ID, and I'm in line for about an hour. Get up there at the beginning. They're like, okay, yeah, you can get your ID. You just need like a birth certificate or social security card. I'm like, I don't have one. They're like, okay, well, go ahead and it's over here. I go stand in another line for 2 hours. I get up there. They're like, oh yeah, you can get your birth certificate. You just need your ID. So it was stuff, it was stuff like that I was dealing with in trying to reintegrate back into society, that it took my focus off of thanking him the right way. And one thing's for sure, I'll make sure that his memory lives on, because I won't stop telling that story. Thank you for your question.
Do you find that immigrants, foreign-born people, are particularly vulnerable because they're in a strange place, they don't know the language, they don't know the laws, oftentimes they don't have the money? So what have you seen?
Well, I can tell you from two perspectives, right? From being in there and being out now as an attorney. So absolutely they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to not only just access to justice, but also victims of crime. Like, who are they going to report to, right? There are a lot of studies out on immigrants who come to this country just to make a living and send back to their family. They are taken advantage of, slave wages and all type of things. And in prison, what I found was there were people who barely spoke English, and they were sentenced to serve time in prison. And instead of being released, they were released to a county jail awaiting extradition back to their country. So that was another head scratcher for me, because now as an attorney, I'm asking myself, right? And not only as an attorney, but a contributing member of society who pays taxes, why are we spending money to lock people up and then send them out of the country? Like, what sense does that make? Like, it makes no sense at all. So I saw a lot of that. And it was very disheartening, because when you think of people and the way we depict people that have handcuffs on them, we immediately, when you see people on the news and a person is arrested, you don't ask yourself, I wonder what he was accused of, or I wonder, if he has a good attorney. You immediately say, I wonder what he did or she did, right? And I found out that many of these people that I met in prison, like, they had families too. They were fathers too. They were brothers too. And I met a lot of people who were getting deported, like, as soon as their sentences were over. And it was one of these things where they would tell me oftentimes, look, man, you think it's violent over here. You don't know violence over in Venezuela or over here. And they would come over here, and circumstance would have it, they would end up in prison, and they would be deported back to the same country that they fled. And many of them would do it over and over again. So that's definitely a long topic and an issue, but thank you for your question.
How you doing? My name is Daryl Wright. I go to John F. Kennedy High School, and I was just wondering where you found the drive and the courage to keep going after you got out of prison, and not to just be one of those people to go back. And did you ever receive an apology from any of the defense attorneys or anybody who wrongly accused you of your crime? Crime?
Great question, but they don't apologize in court. That's not what they do. I had a chance to speak to my my attorney, and look, he failed to investigate my case. Look, I'm accused of a rape, following someone up some stairs, and it's like witnesses all around the school who could have placed, me somewhere else and just totally proved that it was a false accusation. He didn't hire an investigator. He didn't go investigate. He didn't call any witnesses. He didn't do any of this. And I was so upset at him for so long. But when I got a chance to actually hear from him, I heard that he too is human, and he made a mistake and he dropped the ball. And it happens. The practice of law is just that. It's the practice. Some lawyers shouldn't be lawyers. And some lawyers try their damnness, and they just, they make a mistake. We're all human. We are. I do want to say that you all are Easter Sunday sharp over there. That's what we used to say growing up. All right, you really are. And then to answer specifically the question about what encouraged me, if I can get you all to see the wrinkles and creases of anguish on my mother's forehead, in that prison, in that visiting room, being told that that's it, you can't hug the son you gave birth to because the visit is over, those phone calls, just the whole everything, right? Because I'm not the only one there. She's out, but she's in prison in spirit. All of these ridiculous shows about what happens in prison, and she's thinking that this is all happening to her son in prison. I owed her, and I was going to repay her somehow, some way, And that's what encouraged me. And your encouragement may be different. You may find something else that encourages you. Maybe what you hear from me will encourage you to go on and be not just great, but extraordinary, right? because you can do it. You definitely can. And just remember me, man, when you get up there. I might have my AARP card and be retired. And just remember, look out for old me. Throw me a bone, you know? Thank you for your question, though.
Oh, right. Thanks for your presence and teaching us some lessons. I had the one question about your cellmate, but I have another one,
Yes.
and now only have one question. Your perception of having been in jail, and you made some comments about drugs possession. Do you think if we treated all drug possession charges, not necessarily trafficking charges,
Yeah.
as diseases and didn't imprison those people, that would be, and save the prisons for people that have been proven to be violent or violent crimes? Do you think that would be a great improvement in the system, or do you have an opinion on that? And when is your book coming out? I'm just kidding.
Oh,
I don't
thank
know.
you. Thank you for your question. But yeah, I do. I'm a extreme note taker. So I was taking notes in prison, and I take notes here. And I'm a bit of a nerd. I read everything. I read a study in Norway of how they run their prisons, right? And the idea of them running their prisons is more so like how it should be. You're in prison, no doubt. You can't get out and leave, but it doesn't look like a prison, right? And it goes to my point that I'm making. You can't cage people up like animals, feed them like animals, and then release them and tell them to be human. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work at all. And, the thing with people who are in prison, a lot of them in prison, I don't want to paint with such a broad brush. They're there because they have different vices, different type of, abuses and things like that, right? Many of them are substance abusers, right? Many of them are selling drugs to feed their own habit. Many of them are robbing, killing, and stealing to feed their drug habit. And we are punishing people. We have this extreme glutton for punishment in society, right? Like, we don't just put people in prison and say that's punishment. Like, we punish them all the way until they die. Like, you got to register. You can't do this. You can't get this. You can't get that. So people are going to prison and they're not being treated, right? They're not being treated at all. There are people who come and they are right before your eyes. They are suffering from withdrawals of heroin right in the cell with you, if that's your cellmate. They're not being treated at all. And when you don't treat people and they are back released into the same community that they come from, the same things happen. And then, to be quite honest with you, you can get whatever drug you're looking for in prison, okay? Whatever it is, right? And many of them do drugs in prison as well. We have to separate people who are there for non-violent crimes from the people who are there for violent crimes, and I'll tell you why. If you're in a room, if you're raised in a house full of people who yell, you'll raise your voice without knowing. So if you're in prison with a bunch of people who are violent, you will be what as a result? Violent. You are either the one who is handing out the violence or receiving the violence. And the entire system needs to be rehauled. But it has to be a want by that 10% who really has all the money in our society, right? Right? Yeah, well, 1%. Yeah, 1%. It has to be a want to change that. So I really am, I'm an advocate for changing what goes on inside, right? Because if you change what's going on inside, you change the numbers of the people who are inside. If over 70, if it's like over 50, I think it's around 70%. I'm not sure of the recent study. But just think about this, over half of the people in prison have been there before, right? Right? So that means that they've been to prison, this place that we call corrections, they've been released, and they came back. Well, let's use another analogy. Imagine if 50% of the cars that were produced by, I'm not going to name a company, I don't want them mad at me if they see this, but let's just imagine if a car company produced cars, and on average, 50% of those cars came back after they left the production line, it would stop. Something would be done. So why hasn't it been done with the prison system, right? I mean, the answers may be there. Is it because of the people who hugely fill the prison system? Is it a black and brown thing? Is it a poor thing? It's something. We do know that. Thank you for your question, though.
Hello, over here. Hi, my name is Amy Spence. My fiance is Ruel Saylor. He's been in prison for 13 years for a crime that his best friend committed. They both passed polygraph test, him based on innocence, and his best friend admitted he was guilty and also passed. We have always fought for his innocence, for his freedom. There hasn't been 1 year that we've haven't filed something, any kind of appeal or whatever. But recently, the Innocence Project here in Ohio decided to collaborate with his attorney to file his new trial motion, and we have an application of innocence pending with our local conviction integrity unit. They accepted it once last year, sat on it for 9 months, and then denied it. But after this article was written by Kyle Swenson, they decided to reopen his case, officially reopen his case. But I think it was because of the attention, from the article that, brought them to make that decision to reopen and reinvestigate his case. But as the family members, how do we create more attention on these cases when all the evidence is there? It's as clear as day. I mean, if you read this, you would say to yourself, why is this man still in prison? We even started a petition on change.org, and we got 1,000 signatures, but then it stopped.
Right.
So how did your family keep fighting for you after so many years? It's been 13 years for us, and it's now, it seems like we got to this point, with the Innocence Project, which is awesome, but we still want to bring more attention to his case and make more people aware of the injustice that are happening to him and so many others. How do the family members keep fighting and create that attention?
Yeah,
because we've written celebrities and everything too, but
I thank you for your question. I'll make sure that I give you my information before I leave, so we can talk further. But to be honest with you, look, that's a question that my mother or my aunts could answer better than I could. But I will say this: the squeaky wheel gets the oil, So you have to continue to beat that drum until the attention comes. And then listen, we cannot forget about the power that we hold in our hands now with these cell phones, with social media. And you don't have to wait for someone to write a report. You can become your own author and write these blogs and continue to spread them on social media and tag people. Look, tag POTUS, President of the United States, tag, people in it and continue to beat the drum. But he also himself has to continue to write out and wait for justice. And look, the unfortunate thing about prison and being in prison in the time is look, it really doesn't go slow. Before you know it, one Christmas will turn into 8 before you know it. And it's one of these things, the best thing for me to do when I was in there was believe that each and every, day I was going home the next day. That was one of the things that kept me sane, It was like reverse psychology for myself. So I can just imagine what you're going through, because I know what it was like to speak on the phone with my mother, during prison calls and see her on a visit and stuff like that. So I would definitely repeat what I said earlier and just telling you, look, keep the faith and continue to reach out to as many people as you possibly can. On average, I was sending out 50 letters a week on average. Now, you're only supposed to get 10 stamps a week, but I was doing other writings and legal work for people, getting stamps from people and sending out 50 stamps. And many of the letters wouldn't change besides the date. Hello, it's me again. Can you, and I was mailing the same people. And so it took a long time. I was in prison for 5 years before the Innocence Project took my case. And so it just took a lot of reaching out. And now more than ever, back in 1998, there was no Google. Google didn't come out until 1999. There was no emails and there was no cell phone and stuff like that. So, if you're going to tweet and Facebook, do it with the purpose and with the cause. Thank you for your question, though. All right. I'll make sure I give you my information, okay?
This is going to be really a follow-up to that question. Each time I've read or heard about a person like yourself being found innocent or being exonerated, it seems that there was an extraordinarily sloppy job done on the police and the prosecutor's side of investigating and making any real effort to determine what happened. Now, I appreciate the pressure that is brought on the assistant prosecutors or district attorneys, depending where you're from, to achieve a conviction. But from your vantage point, Do you have any suggestions as to changes that could be made on the prosecutor's side and perhaps on the police side to see that matters such as yours are, in fact, properly investigated?
Thank you for your question, and I think that's a great question, and I actually have been giving this some thought. The relationship between the police and the prosecutors shouldn't be as close as they are. They should not be able to work hand in hand. Prosecutors should not be able to become investigators and then back to a prosecutor. You shouldn't be able to go into a room and question a suspect, as we've seen so many times with prosecutors. You shouldn't be able to go tell a police officer how to question a suspect, how to obtain stuff. We have created a criminal justice system and a system in itself that pits sides against one another. And I don't care if it's a spitball contest, whatever type of contest it is, you don't care about anything besides winning. And when you do that, justice is robbed. So my suggestion would be, we need to have a separate entity between the police and the prosecutors. An entity where you don't have to know the name of a person to find out whether there's enough evidence of guilt. You definitely don't need to know the color of a person to find out if there's enough evidence for guilt. You don't need those things. There should be a room with 3 open-minded people who get evidence, who look at evidence and decide whether or not it goes to trial. And the prosecutor and the police should not be able to hand job that evidence into making it fit whatever that they want it to fit. It should never be this way. It just shouldn't. And then when you get out, if you are wrongfully convicted, it's a thing called immunity. So you can't even sue the prosecutors and the police unless you catch them doing something egregious, meaning that they were actually on tape dropping the murder weapon at your house or something like that. And how do you do that? How do you, like most of the cases of people being wrongfully convicted, they've been there for years before technology was out. And now science is advancing right now with DNA and all type of stuff to get people out. But once you get out, you can't even punish the people who did it to you, because many of them who are prosecutors and police officers are now judges and now captains of the force and stuff like that. It is all about winning. It is not about justice at all. It's just not. You can see I'm passionate about that. Like that is mind-boggling. Thank you, though.
Can you comment on the wildly popular Serial podcast?
Yeah.
It's kind of a similar situation where the lawyer didn't do her job.
Yeah.
And is that going to help Innocence Projects?
I actually was in prison with Stephen Avery. Stephen Avery was in Wisconsin. The show is about a case from Wisconsin. And I didn't know him personally and stuff like that. But when you're in prison, like you bounce around from prison to prison and stuff like that. So I was in the same system with Stephen Avery. I don't know enough about the case to venture into guilt or innocence or anything like that. But I do know this. I can't even go and get my own niece or nephew out of school, and I'm their uncle. So how on earth can the police go and get a kid out of school, question them in a police station, basically question them for hours to say what they want them to say, then take them back to school and later use that evidence to charge him and his uncle with a crime? How on earth, what, if we want to preserve the criminal justice system, they should be given a new trial. That's what they should be given. They should be given a new trial. If there's enough evidence and you feel like they're guilty, then there should be enough evidence still to find them guilty fairly without using evidence that was manufactured by way of intimidation and just taking advantage of people. Just taking advantage of people. And so for you all who've seen this show, Making of a Murderer, you know in detail what I'm talking about. But for those of you who haven't, some of the evidence that was used in the case, there was a kid who was basically, he was questioned for hours and hours with no parent and no lawyer in this police department, being questioned by people who question people for a living and have been doing it forever. And they use this evidence to convict them at their trial. And it's heartbreaking. This kid is in prison right now, basically, that's a de facto life sentence he has with all those years that he's in prison. And I'm glad that they exposed this through this show. But also, there's another point that that I want to make about the show that I think it missed. So Stephen Avery was wrongfully convicted. This guy in Making of a Murder was wrongfully convicted. He was released after 20 years, and DNA proved that he didn't commit this rape and I think murder or something like that. It probably was a rape. So he's released from prison, and the crime that he's in jail for now happened like a year after his release, or probably shorter than that. He's released from prison with nothing, and he's staying on an auto body salvage yard, basically a junkyard, in a trailer, surrounded by nothing but vacant, torn down cars, isolated, reminiscent of what? A prison. You're also isolated in the prison. He wasn't given mental health care. He wasn't a mental evaluation, no screening, no nothing. Just, oh yeah, our bad. You're released. You didn't do it. You didn't commit the crime. So he's released in these conditions of God knows what, into a trailer yard, living by himself, and now he's arrested and in prison for murder. That should be a bigger topic in itself. Like I said, I don't know the evidence of the case, but I do know the fact that he was released without no one talking to him. And I think, look, after 20 years of anything, anything, whether it's marriage or whatever it is, you might need to talk to someone from time to time. And it's like he's released from prison and it's like nothing. So it's just, that case is just mind-boggling. Thank you for your question, though. All right, brother. Thank you again for having me out, man. Thank you. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. Today at the City Club, we are enjoying a Friday forum with Jarrett Adams, co-founder of Life After Justice. Community partners for today's forum are the Northeast Ohio chapter of the American Constitution Society and the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. Our hospitality partner is the Metropolitan at the 9 Hotel. We thank you for your partnership. We welcome guests at tables hosted by Edwin's Restaurant and Leadership Institute and the Ohio Innocence Project's Northeast Ohio Board of Advocates. Lastly, we welcome students from JFK Eagle Academy and JFK Pact Academy. We thank all of you for being here. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.